Comment on the Doomed Week videos for your chance to win the rulebook. We will choose 3 winners, one from the YouTube comments, one from OnTableTop.com, and our Cult of Games members get an extra chance to win.
Hello everybody and welcome to the channel. Today I'm joined by Chris McDowall and Ana Polanšćak. I've got that horribly wrong, haven't I? And you've just told me. I was so close and yet so very, very far away. We're going to be talking about The Doomed, a post-apocalyptic sci-fi fantasy game on your tabletop. It's difficult to pin down exactly what it is because it could be so very, very many things. It is great to have the pair of you here with us today. The first question for you, Chris, is how do you describe The Doomed? What are people looking at?
It's difficult. The intent all along with The Doomed was that I wanted it to be a narrative war game or a narrative miniatures game, I guess, or narrative skirmish game. Even now, I can't think of a proper thing. Yeah, let's say a narrative skirmish game because I knew I wanted that narrative side of things. Mm-hmm. But even that means so many different things to lots of different people. But yeah, in essence, it is the way that the game kind of ended up focusing was it's a game of semi-competitive horror hunting, I guess, is the closest I've come to pinning it down.
Yeah, it's an interesting combination because the background for the world is hinted at. It's not writ large. You don't have tons of in-depth maps and details of various peoples and continents within it. It's all sort of broad brush strokes to allow people to interpret it whatever way they want. But sort of brass tacks, the world was inhabited by aliens who introduced themselves to a more feudal technological level and then left again. So you have this strange blend of medieval weaponry meets relics of science fiction meets aliens.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting that you've said that because I deliberately left this very open to interpretation because I wanted it to be something that people could. I didn't want anyone to feel like they didn't have the right miniatures for this. I think there's definitely a style of miniature that I had in mind, perhaps, and that I've made for my own games of this at home. But I wanted people to be able to interpret it in different ways. So, like you've said, yeah, the world is essentially the implication is that it was kind of a feudal world that was inhabited by the company. And it's interesting that you said aliens because I don't think I mentioned anything about aliens in the book. Just that they came from the stars. So in my head, they were perhaps a bit more human. But this is it. It's like there's no right answer to this.
Yeah.
But yeah, a more advanced
world, they're aliens regardless of.
That's true. They're aliens to these people, I guess. Yeah, but a more advanced, technologically advanced company sort of occupied this planet and then abandoned it. So it's sort of the story of what's left behind in this kind of world that's a bit of a mix of sci-fi and medieval and horror elements all thrown in together.
What was the genesis of making it that way? Was it just a case of going, I don't want to be so tightly defined that it will focus people into a specific theme?
Well, I wanted one of the things that I really wanted to do with this game, like I said, is to encourage people to feel like they had the freedom to kitbash together, almost sort of freeform kitbash something together, and there will be a place for that thing somewhere in this world. So when I started making miniatures for this project, before I even knew this was going to be a thing, when I was kitbashing miniatures together, I was using lots of things like the Frostgrave sets that were kind of, a bit more kind of grounded medieval and, 40K stuff as well, and kind of putting them together just because it looked cool. Yeah. And then when I came to sort of trying to make a bit more of an implied setting for this game, it just made sense to enable that, so that if someone does have a set of fantasy miniatures, they can kind of show up with just a medieval themed warband and you can make them fit.
Yeah.
And likewise, they could just show up with a unit of sci-fi looking troops and you could make that work as well. So it's very much all in aid of getting those miniatures to the table and sort of inspiring you to maybe put things together that might not necessarily seem like they would fit.
Yeah, which is interesting for multiple reasons. But I think if we bring Ana in here, you did I was going to say was it all of the miniature photography for the book itself?
All of the photography.
Yeah. So there's an awful lot of what's described in the book as the kitbash attitude. So when you were given the remit, did Chris reach out and go, I need X number of gangs, X number of monsters, and here's what they are? Or was it more, I require something, please fill folders with photos?
It was, I got like a list of models I need to do, and I just got the description of vaguely what they are and what kind of weapons they carry. Also, Chris gave me like a mood board, basically a collection of artwork that I can use to see what kind of vision he has for the setting, the overall mood. But yeah, beyond that, it was all up to me, and it was a lot of freedom. What I wanted was not to go overboard with sculpting, just to keep it looking approachable to people, not to so someone who is not well versed in kitbashing would look at them and see, okay, that's achievable for me, I can do that. So that was my philosophy when making the minis for the rulebook.
And there's an awful lot of really interesting, I would say, almost frightening miniatures in there. You have a very distinctive style. Let's put it like that, because it has and John Blanche's name gets thrown around an awful lot when people start to do weird and wonderful things, but it almost has that Blanche meets Bosch style, because there's a strange blending of machines and fleshy parts.
Yeah, well, both Blanche and Bosch are influences on my work, and I suppose it shows.
Well, to the good in every respect, I imagine there. How much back and forth was there between both of you when it came to the miniatures and the design, and then what you were working on? Were there stages where you were sending pieces of work back to Chris to take a look at, and were you adapting it, or was it just a one and done? Here is what I've given you.
Yeah, I just gave them pretty much the finished stuff, and they said, "Yeah, that's good," and and everyone was happy. So.
What was interesting with this is, so my background is a bit more in RPGs, and when I've commissioned artists for illustrators for RPGs, I kind of quite like to just give them quite a broad brief and say, to do the thing that you think looks good, because you probably know what looks good better than I do in terms of art. And this was kind of the same case, but it was interesting because we did have to try and match a few models to some of the things in the book. So it was in a way, it was a little bit tighter than a brief I would normally do. But it's really interesting because the piece that you flashed up a little while ago, the Devourer in the book, is Anna's version of that is like this wolf demon thing with like three mouths or more. Yeah. And I had really pictured it completely differently, but from the description that's in the book, because there's just kind of a little one-line description of this devourer creature and the implications that are there with its attacks and what it can do. Mine was much more like I was imagining like this big insect thing, but now we have this wolf thing as well. So it was kind of a really good proof of concept of the idea that you can take these things in different directions, but they still feel like they fit. Yeah,
I mean, it's one of the things that I've noticed. We played with the Devourer, and the Devourer we chose was a many tentacled, huge mouthed creature, because we had one from a strange game lying about, and was like, well, that works beautifully. Because some of the mechanics, you look at the little line of brief, and then you look at the little mechanic, and it goes, well, when it hits with a ranged attack, it then moves towards, and I just get the idea of maybe tendrils lashing out and then pulling itself forward, and that's the ranged attack, and that's it advancing afterwards. Because it offers a whole range of miniatures and freedom to express yourself within just these little 1 or 2 line descriptions.
That's it, yeah. And I didn't want to leave it completely open. It was kind of finding a balance, really, because I didn't want it to just be like, oh, well, this is a large monster and off you go, because then it's kind of like, it's like looking at a blank page where you think, I don't know what to write. But I'm hoping that we've found a nice balance of having just enough sort of evocative stuff in there to kind of get the ball rolling in your imagination.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole slew, and his work is absolutely fantastic, and it runs throughout the entire book. But there's also a really nice set of artwork as well from Helja. Was that produced in advance of Anna's work or alongside? Because obviously we've only got Ana and yourself with us today, but the artwork in the book is very evocative and very encouraging as to how you may perceive some of these things.
Yeah, I mean, from my point of view, I was sort of seeing them come in simultaneously, but I don't know if Ana, were you seeing the illustrations at all?
No. The first time I saw them when I got the PDF of the book.
Ah, cool.
And it was really cool for me to see how Helge imagined the same stuff. Through the same characters, basically painted them, but there's a lot of difference. But then again, there's some cool similarities as well.
Yeah, there were a few that I noticed, and I thought, was this on purpose? Like some of them look quite similar.
And I think it's good to have this artwork in the book next to my models, and people who see the book, it encourages them, and it shows that there's no defined way to make your models. Like you can do your own interpretation, because that's how I usually do when I play a game. I just reskin it the way I want, and But for some people, they have sort of mental breaks. They feel like they have to follow what the rule book says. Things have to.
Yeah. And in fact, the only real piece of feedback. So to be clear, at the start, I worked with Osprey, kind of talking back and forth about different artists we could use for miniatures. I'm not just saying this because Anna's here. I knew straight away that I wanted to use Ana for miniatures if we could, and it was one of those things where I thought, no, we should be too busy. But then when that all came together, that was amazing. But for illustrators, I didn't really have someone in mind straight away. So this was a collaboration with Osprey. We're going out finding things and saying, how about this person? How about this person? But then when it started rolling, I didn't have, after the initial briefs, I didn't have a lot of kind of feedback. But the one thing that I remember sort of putting my foot, well, the closest I get to putting my foot down was there's a piece on page 10, which is a character with a big hammer about to strike down at one of these horrors. And I was speaking with, I forget who it was at Osprey, saying, and they said, oh, I think this piece looks great. I think maybe the hammer looks slightly out of proportion, but I'm sure that can be tidied up. And I put my foot down and say, no, we have to leave that hammer as it is, because it does look a little bit too big. But again, it kind of, I like that it looks like something you could have kitbashed together.
Yeah.
Like almost like you've used a hammer that is from a bigger model. And I wanted the world to feel that way. Like it doesn't have to all be perfect. It can be kind of rough around the edges. So I liked that slightly weird proportion on that one piece. That was the one time where I sort of used what little authority I had.
It's the overzealous, over the top heroic nature of things that sometimes especially if you're going to hit a monster that large with a hammer, you should really make sure that it's a massive hammer and it doesn't get back up again.
That's it.
If it does, things will go horribly wrong. You said that you suggested like mood boards and images to Ana when she was working on the miniature side of things. There's also like a mood board for each of the factions that are themed around the seasons. Where did that sort of concept come from?
I mean, the seasons thing kind of fell in quite naturally. And initially, the 4 factions that I had in mind were very simple. And it was around the idea that I wanted people to be able to, like I say, if they kitbash some little miniature together, that there is a home for that miniature somewhere in this game. So on the very, very basic, broad initial idea for the factions, it was kind of like there's a human faction, a robot faction, a mutant faction, and then like an alien faction. And I thought, well, I want to give them a bit more flavor than that. So the human faction kind of are like there are humans in all faction, but these are like the more human flavored faction, the inheritors. They kind of naturally felt like they were sort of the remnants of the old world. Yeah. So they kind of had this like autumn theme is how I was envisioning it, where it's like they're clearly at the end of their decline and they're about to slip into kind of slip into whatever winter may hold. And then I kind of thought about, well, could I apply this to the other factions as well? So the sort of more robotic faction, the Martyrs, they had this kind of, again, the winter theme in the sense that they're kind of almost reveling in this doom and the fact that they blame themselves and they blame their humanity for all this stuff that happened. The mutant faction, the Reborn, their kind of spring made sense there because they're kind of like, they're starting a new form of humanity, I suppose.
Yeah.
And they're kind of, if anything, I guess they're the optimistic faction. And then Exiles are Exiles is where you put in any alien miniature that you want to use that doesn't quite fit anywhere else. So it's all because no important alien is going to come to this planet because it's terrible. But someone might end up here. So this is where all these aliens might end up. And they had this kind of summer revelry, like wild hunt kind of thing going on as well. So that the season thing kind of came as a way to give them a little bit more flavor beyond sort of where they started.
It's interesting, but even things like the Exiles. So whenever you say the wild hunt, obviously it conjures images, and I like the idea of the world of the Doomed being, let's say, annexed. Quarantines. Nobody's supposed to go there because something has gone horribly wrong. But then aliens are going, I fancy a party. I fancy a tricky hunt. Why don't we go there? Yeah. We'll spend the weekend. We'll see what we can kill. It'll be a laugh. And you go, why are you on this world?
Well, I realized as I was writing it, I thought, I haven't given this like planet a name. And I thought I need to think of a name for this planet. And I thought, well, no, because the name of the planet only really matters if there are other planets in the picture. Whereas for everyone who's here, it's just the world. Like this is their world. You kind of don't need a name for the planet, really.
You can't get on, you can't get off.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Well, perhaps it depends how your campaign goes, but we'll talk about that in the gameplay video.
Oh yeah, 100%. Anna, the sort of freedom you had then, is there any particularly standout miniatures, whether it's the horrors themselves or some of the warband figures you created that really stand out to you and you think, well, that is exactly how I imagined it in my mind? Because often when I'm kitbashing, I'll start with an idea, a concept, and then as I start to put figures together, things change, bits move around, and they occasionally will turn out nothing like I originally intended. Not that it's bad, but just it develops in its own way. They sort of live and grow as you slap green stuff and glue down.
When I was working on these guys, I did only have a vague idea of what they're gonna look like because I had a ton of bits and I just started putting things together. I really like the Falcon from the Martyr retinue. It's the flying little robot.
Yeah.
There I used plastic art actually to build this contraption. It's not a very common shape. It's not humanoid, so it was a bit. I needed to get a bit more creative to create that thingy, and I really loved the horror that Chris mentioned, the Devourer. I had a really good time with that one. I picture it just puking its stomach bile at people, and then they start burning and just chomps them up.
It's much easier to eat your meat once it's been tenderized.
Yeah,
100%. Are there any, having seen the PDF subsequently and seen some of Helga's artwork, are there any pieces of art in there that you particularly go, oh, that would make a fantastic model and I know exactly how to do that? Are there any eye-catching pieces that you would like to work on?
Again, the Martyrs, because it's my favorite faction from the game, of course. They're emos. They have really cool skull robot stuff, and I make skull robot stuff. I love skull robot stuff.
Skull robots are always good. The Dooms themselves, of which there are 5. Obviously, whenever people think of things like this, there's generally a seed that's come from somewhere, whether it's 7 deadly sins or things like that. What constitutes the Doomed for you, Chris?
So again, this is another thing where you could interpret it in a number of ways. You could interpret it that these are like gods, I guess, but to me, I see them more as just kind of like forces. So the 5 dooms in the game, the idea of these is if you play a campaign, each of these dooms has their own little track, and they'll be gradually rising. And when one of them hits the top, it triggers an awful cataclysm. And also they'll each be sort of spitting out these events as the campaign proceeds as well. So yeah, we've got hunger, hatred, domination, oblivion, and ruin. And they kind of just emerged as initially just as a sort of set of events, really, because I knew that I wanted these sort of random events in the campaign. And the more I worked on them, the more they sort of bled into the other areas of the world as well. I think I chose 5 for a really boring practical reason. If I didn't want to have 4, because many other dark sci-fi fantasy properties might have 4 evil forces going around, and I thought, well, I want to make sure I don't accidentally just create a reskinned version of that.
Yeah.
So having 5 and making them really focused, and almost making them so they're not almost that they could be seen as like this divine, or well, not divine, this kind of supernatural force, but it's also just what naturally happens in this horrible situation. So the hunger is just because there's not enough stuff to go around, and that's escalating. Hatred is just because people are turning on each other. Domination is just because somebody is going to, in a situation like this, somebody's going to try and seize control and seize power. Oblivion, some people are just going to want to say, well, let's just call it a day and let's throw the whole thing into a black hole. And ruin is, I'm sure Anna's favorite, same as me, wanting to just like mope about it, and wanting to just mourn what has been lost and what's left behind.
They're very well defined as concepts. You know, when somebody says the hunger is coming up, you can get an idea behind it. But it was interesting whenever I hit then the actual horrors, that they weren't just specifically tied. It wasn't, here are your horrors for hunger, here are your horrors for ruin or oblivion. You had to, they could equally fit wherever, but at the same time they may be unconnected with the overall doom that's inflicting itself upon you. Did they start out as completely individualized, or did you attempt to codify them to begin with and then realize that it's probably better just to keep them sort of nebulous?
Yeah, so there's 36 horrors in the book. So at one point, I think I did think about having perhaps 6 different dooms and then 6 horrors for each of them and kind of tying them together. But yeah, I think there's probably a draft somewhere where I've got that laid out, but I think I preferred it as being this slightly looser connection, so that these are the forces that are occurring in the world and the horrors are kind of their own thing. Again, just to try and not tie them down conceptually too much. So some of the horrors will have some crossover with these. So like the Devourer we talked about is very reminiscent of the hunger element of the dooms. But I decided in the end to just have them maybe suggest connections rather than be like explicitly, oh, this is a hunger monster, and here's how it all ties together. And also the other thing is, and I will talk about this a bit in the gameplay video, but I wanted to have like, I'm a big fan of stripping back mechanics that I don't need, and I feel like that could be at the risk of being a mechanic that is one more little bit of complexity that perhaps doesn't need to be in the system.
It's an interesting one because well, the Devourer, obviously, you say Devourer, you think hunger. I was looking at it and going, well, it could equally be something like the rage, the destruction in that respect, something that's just an unstoppable force. So yeah, they bleed across the lines, and it shows that the dooms possibly aren't as individualized as we think. Maybe they're just facets of one great doom that's coming along.
Well, they do each have a. So I mentioned that there's like if any of the doom tracks hit the top. There is an extra horror for each of the dooms, actually. So there is one doom that is tied to each horror. No, sorry, one horror that is tied to each doom at the back of the book, and that's for the kind of you've messed up scenario, basically, at the end of the campaign.
Where does the world of the doomed go from here? Do you see this as being everything people need? Are you toying with the idea of expanding or exploding it further, or was it just a nice little gem that just sits there for people to explore?
I'm generally quite a fan of doing one book and trying to get that book to be everything that you need.
Mm-hmm.
So like I said, in this one, there's 36 horrors, which is probably too many for what would have been sensible to put in the book. But I wanted there to be a lot of horrors and a lot of scenarios so you could play through kind of indefinitely and have lots of choice for which ones to build. So I do see it as kind of done. I think inevitably at some point I'll come back and think, well, what about this little extra edition? And that might just be something that I do on my blog as little extras. There are no plans currently for a sort of another release related to the Doomed. But so yeah, at the moment it's going to be a self-contained thing as far as I can tell.
Hopefully people will be inspired by this to pick up the book. And if this hasn't already inspired you, then stay tuned for the rest of the week, because we have a mini campaign coming with myself and Shay. And as Chris was saying, we'll have another chat about the game design as well towards the end of the week, which will give you a fuller idea of what exactly the Doomed is all about. If people want to keep abreast of what you're up to, Bastionland is your blog?
Yeah, bastionland.com, and that has links to all the socials, newsletters, discords, etc. down the side.
And Ana, if people want to check out what you've been working on, you have the Gardens of Hecate as well.
Yep, that's my blog.
And there's also some stunning little miniatures that people can pick up from various places. Been a couple of Kickstarter campaigns. Creepy little skull face things, which would work beautifully as minions in the Doomed, I'm just going to say. Yeah. Or a warband, depending on how you're feeling. It's been an absolute pleasure to sit down with both of you today. If anybody have any questions, please feel free to drop them down below, and I'll pass them across to Chris and Ana and try and get you an answer. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of the week.
Comment on the Doomed Week videos for your chance to win the rulebook. We will choose 3 winners. 1 from the YouTube comments, 1 from OnTableTop.com, and our Cult of Games members get an extra chance to win.
Go ahead and check out our other content on screen now. And while you're at it, why not hit subscribe and remember to ding our dong. Go on, you know you want to click it. Go on.